that's very interesting. That was brought up by someone on another show actually this week, and also what was brought up in that same comment was that, and I don't remember the player's name now, but he was a free agent signing who was in for most of the plays, and we're having a problem evidently evaluating those higher round draft picks, and they're not producing. So you're on a team and you have free agents playing high draft pick minutes, and vice versa. That's another problem that evidently this organization's having is the evaluation of talent, especially the talent that's coming out of college, and where they're picking them, and based on where they're picking them, of course, that's how they're going to pay them, and they're not earning the money. Now, it's not my money; it's Tom Benson' money. If he doesn't mind wasting it, it's on him. But I know if it's my money, that's not how I want it spent.
Okay.
Kyle, you need to let Deuce explain. Deuce.
I was about to go to Deuce.
Yeah, because who that confessional to all the listeners, you need to check out on Tuesday night who that confessional is, because I really believe this, and I say this, and I'm not boosting his ego, but that show last night with Brian and Deuce, that was Emmy Award type of show that they stated. I cannot stress to anybody to go to the website and to the downloads and download that show, Who That Confessional with Deuce and Brian. Unbelievable, the things that they told. They spoke the truth. They gave knowledge. And if you are a Who Dat member of this nation or a listener, you cannot argue with the facts that these two brothers gave last night. Unbelievable. And Deuce has brought up a great point, and I'm going to let him say what he talked about with Stephon Anthony, something I did not even realize myself.
Yeah, well, go ahead, Deuce, since he eloquently gave you this great intro.
Introed me great and didn't even tell me what point I was talking about. But let me ask Who Dat Nation this. What position does Mark Ingram play? Anybody know?
Running back,
right?
Yes.
Stephon Anthony is a middle linebacker. He's always been a middle linebacker. He's been a middle linebacker his entire career. He is going to continue to be a middle linebacker in the NFL. So to force him to play a position in strong side linebacker, which, keep in mind, Anthony's strength, his bulk, is stopping the run. Last season, he was arguably the best Saints defender in run stuffs and stopping the run, especially from that second layer. But see, on the strong side linebacker position, you're asking him to cover tight end. Stephon Anthony ain't going to cover tight ends. He's not a good coverage linebacker. Never has been, probably never will be. So when you ask a man to move a position, I might as well ask Mark Ingram to move to left guard and fill that spot. It doesn't fit. So when we're taking these first-round draft picks like Stephon Anthony, and while I do agree with your previous statement that we have drafted poorly defensively historically under Payton and Loomis, I can't say that for Anthony. Anthony is a perfect fit. And then we bring in a guy like Laurinaitis, who is at the twilight of his career. And this is what frustrates me in the Anthony situation. Stephon Anthony last year, how he played as a rookie, is as good as James Laurinaitis was last year towards the end of his career. That being said, logically, I can deduce that Stephon Anthony is going to be as good, if not better, than that same player this year, because he is younger and more knowledgeable and accustomed to an NFL speed and level of football. So the thought that we're going to move him over to a position that he's not even qualified to play and then sit him on the bench and blame him like it's his fault that he's not strong there, that's a problem with defensive coaching, and I think it's a problem with a certain member of the head coaching staff, which is only one of them, playing a little overreach and not really knowing what he's dabbling with. There's no reason Stephon Anthony should be riding the pine. And this is not meant as offense to James Laurinaitis because he didn't have a bad game, but there's no way I take James Laurinaitis over Stephon Anthony right now as a middle linebacker. And the fact that we're putting Anthony on the strong side, and now Mike Malty is getting more snaps than him at strong side because he is a better coverage player, is ridiculous.
Wow. It just doesn't seem like Payton can get it right when it comes to evaluating the talent. And I'm not saying coach is not a great offensive-minded coach. I will never say that. But what I will say is the fact that he's making some very, very questionable calls. Now, you drafted him number 1. You had him in. You cut Lofton. You gave him the reins. Then you took him away from him. Just took them. You didn't say, all right, maybe, the first year he was still learning, but you just decided, no, he's no good, and we're just going to move him. That doesn't really make sense. If you're going to give the kid a chance, wouldn't you have considered, or maybe considered, that his second season he would be more productive? And he was highly productive his first season. He did make some mistakes in coverage, right, Deuce? But he also was getting better toward the end of the season. Very, very questionable.
Keep in mind, how many middle linebackers can you name right now in the NFL who are strong coverage linebackers? There's very few, and most of those are going to play in like a cover 2 defense. There's almost none of them.
Luke Kuechly?
So why are you going to move him and expect him to just magically become this coverage linebacker? That makes no sense to me.
Well, that's your coach.
Same thing with this is the same pattern. Same thing with Andrew Speaks. You draft him to be your right tackle. You bounce this man all over. Then you have the people complaining about the draft picks. It's the same story. You got rid of Breaux, thinking he was too old, and this man is productive. I mean, this stuff is just very questionable. And people don't like to hear this, and people make excuses for this man as a coach. And I said this last night on Deuce and them show. I'm going to say it again on this show, and I'll say it again on Professor Speaks. You have given this man has a Jezebel spirit. He's got too much control. Nobody's doing any checks and balances with him. Nobody questions him. I'm sure it's very frustrating for Mr. Allen. I'm sure it was frustrating for Rob Ryan and all these other defense coordinators when you have an offensive-minded coach that's now dictating you how to do defense. And these guys can't bring in their own coaches. They can't do anything without getting approval from him, and it has led to a dismal defense.
Okay, let's move on, guys. Paul Kruger, man, should the Saints be looking for a refund here? Frank?
No, I don't think so. I think, he does bring a veteran presence, and sometimes you have to account for that type of experience and knowledge in the locker room. I don't know if he's going to be the dominant player that he's been over the past previous years, but I do think there's some value with having him on the field. And let me just comment on the last topic, and then we can move on. Being a basketball coach myself, and if you guys don't know, I've coached professionally for over 25 years in Atlanta. And coaches, when they're evaluating talent, oftentimes they look at an athlete and they're banking on that player's athletic ability to make a transition from a position that they may not have played and move them to another position so they could be on the field. You see that quite often in basketball, and the Pelicans did it when they drafted Austin Rivers out of Duke, who played a shooting guard. But he's so good and talented, they tried to convert him into a point guard. And now he's under his dad, and he is starting to show that he can play that position. But it took him about 4 years to get there. Unfortunately, there are 82 games in basketball and only 16 in football. So I can see the logic behind the coaching staff wanting to move Anthony to a different position because they want him on the field. He's just not there yet. So that's the logic behind it. Right, wrong, or indifferent. We may not agree with it, but it's better to move him and keep him on the field than not have him on the field at all. So you imagine having him and Laurinaitis on the field at the same time. So he's struggling. I do think he'll get better over time. In terms of Kruger, you couldn't pass up the possibility of, what he could possibly bring to the table to create that pass rush to complement Jordan on the outside. Again, I think that's the missing piece to the Saints defense. It would all fall into place if we can get somebody to step up on that front four or one of those linebackers to put constant pressure, and you have the game plan and account for. Right now, no offensive line is afraid of the Saints' front seven, and it makes it real easy for them to game plan and pick the defense apart.
Well, in his first time donning the black and gold, 1 tackle, 2 missed tackles, and no pressures on Carr.
And I say the question again. Why did Ellaby be allowed to leave? Why did Browner be allowed to leave? Why did Kruger be allowed to leave? Why did Jarvis Byrd, C.J. Spillers, why did all these other teams they came from, why did those teams feel that they were to be let go? Evidently, there was something in the due diligence the Saints should have checked out even more, because Kruger was known for that Super Bowl game, and that's what he banked a lot off of that. And he's still learning. Like Frank said, he's just starting, and we'll have to keep an eye on it throughout the season. But there has to be something to why those guys were allowed to leave those other teams.
Okay.
Well, let me add this, and I agree with what my coach friend Atlanta was saying to an extent. But I'll also say this: more often than not, when you try to run that experiment, it fails, especially with players that only play in a 16-game season, like you're saying. And I think another good example of that is Paul Kruger. You want to know where Paul Kruger has had success most of his career? Cam Jordan's position, not on the other side of the line, but playing the 6 tech on the right tackle side. Paul Kruger's not this speedy edge rusher that's going to get around the side like a Junior Gillette was when he was having success with New Orleans. That's not Kruger's play. Now, he can probably play that other side, but here's my whole argument about these moving people around methodology. Is it worth taking a player, especially like on Cam's level, who is at a superstar level, and making them just good or above average to make another player average, or would you rather just have one superstar and maybe a below or average player? I don't think it's worth sacrificing your talent by bringing it down so that you can raise somebody up. I think that we need to have the superstar and then just find somebody else who can fill in beside, not force the superstar to change who he is. I don't think that you can try for a few years, but in the NFL, a few years of not being good usually means you're out the NFL. I think you could potentially ruin Stephon Anthony's career trying to turn him into a coverage linebacker when he is a prototype middle linebacker in a 4-3 scheme. That's just not who he is. He's not a cover 2 middle linebacker. He's not a drop back in zone. This is not who he is. And I think it's wrong to force him to try to play like that. So we've got like this NFL Madden, mentality where we can just take players from other teams and put them in our defense because this one's rated 88, this one's rated 86, they're going to be good. But in real life, that doesn't work. And I think we're seeing that now with our linebacking core and defensive line. Sure, there's some good names on there, but is it really a cohesive unit?
Yeah. I heard somebody else talk about this on one of the networks, and it wasn't about the Saints. It was about another team trying to do the same thing. And the guy was saying, and he was an ex-player, when you take a person's natural tendencies and what they have learned for many a year, and then you try to put them into this new position, there's going to be that period of adjustment. But you can't just say, okay, you haven't adjusted the way I like you to, and we're going to cut you. Something has to give. And speaking of that, it kind of segues into this Loomis and Payton philosophy. If you are not what we think you should be, then we're going to let you go. It's almost like Dumb and Dumber here, guys. I'm just going to say it like that, because Mickey Loomis and Sean Payton have contributed to the New Orleans Saints woes over the past several years because of their poor talent evaluation in bringing in free agents that do not really fit the scheme of the New Orleans Saints. Now, let's just look at this. 10 of the largest free agent deals that we're still paying on. We got Jarvis Byrd, Fleener, and Streep still with the team, right? But we're still paying Grubbs, $16 million, Keenan Lewis, $11 million, C.J. Spiller, $9 million, Broderick Bunkley, $9 million, Lofton, we're still paying $8 million, Brandon Browner, $8 million, and Hawthorne, $8 million. No, $6 million, I'm sorry. Wow. I mean, then you look at and you hear the stories about the $100 million in dead money. I'm thinking if there's somebody at the top who is really supposed to be running this team.